Good morning. I'm going to be reading to you from the book of Acts, chapter 9, verses 1 through 20. Meanwhile, Saul was still spewing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest, seeking letters to the synagogues in Damascus. If he found persons who belonged to the way, whether men or women, these letters would authorize him to take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. During the journey, as he approached Damascus, suddenly a light from heaven encircled him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice asking him, "Saul, Saul, why are you harassing me?" Saul asked, "Who are you, Lord?" "I am Jesus whom you are harassing," came the reply. "Now get up and enter the city. You will be told what you must do." Those traveling with him stood there speechless. They heard the voice but saw no one. After they picked Saul up from the ground, he opened his eyes, but he couldn't see. So they led him by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind and neither ate nor drank anything. In Damascus there was a certain disciple named Ananias. The Lord spoke to him in a vision, "Ananias!" He answered, "Yes, Lord." The Lord instructed him, "Go to Judas' house on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul. He is praying. In a vision he has seen a man named Ananias enter and put his hands on him to restore his sight." Ananias countered, "Lord, I have heard many reports about this man. People say he has done horrible things to your holy people in Jerusalem. He's here with authority from the chief priest to arrest everyone who calls on your name." The Lord replied, "Go. This man is the agent I have chosen to carry my name before Gentiles, kings, and Israelites. I will show him how much he must suffer for the sake of my name." Ananias went to the house. He placed his hands on Saul and said, "Brother Saul, the Lord sent me, Jesus, who appeared to you on the way as you were coming here. He sent me so that you could see again and be filled with the Holy Spirit." Instantly flakes fell from Saul's eyes and he could see again. He got up and was baptized. After eating, he regained his strength. He stayed with the disciples in Damascus for several days. Right away, he began to preach about Jesus in the synagogues. "He is God's Son," he declared. It's the word of God for you, the people of God. Martin Luther King Jr. says, "To our most bitter opponents we say, we shall match your capacity to inflict suffering by our capacity to endure suffering. We shall meet your physical force with soul force. Do to us what you will, and we shall continue to love you. We cannot in all good conscience obey your unjust laws, because non-cooperation with evil is as much a moral obligation as is cooperation with good. Throw us in jail, and we shall still love you. Bomb our homes and threaten our children, and we shall still love you. Send your hooded perpetrators of violence into our communities at the midnight hour and beat us and leave us half dead, and we shall still love you. But be assured that we will wear you down by our capacity to suffer. One day we shall win freedom, but not only for ourselves. We shall so appeal to your heart and conscience that we shall win you in the process, and our victory will be a double victory." And the great theologian Walter Wink has this to say, "Love of enemies has for our time become the litmus test of authentic Christian faith. Commitment to justice, liberation, or the overthrow of oppression is not enough. For all too often the means used have brought in their wake new injustices and oppressions. Love of enemies is the recognition that the enemy too is a child of God. The enemy too believes they are in the right and fears us because we represent a threat against their values, lifestyle, or affluence. When we demonize our enemies, calling them names and identifying them with absolute evil, we deny that they have felt that of God within them that makes transformation possible. Instead, we play God We write them out of the book of life. We conclude that our enemy has drifted beyond the redemptive hand of God. It is our very inability to love our enemies that throws us into the arms of grace. Saul, that we heard from in Acts, is breathing threats and destruction. I really love that language. This whole scene is very dramatic. Saul is a pretty dramatic guy, a dramatic character in the Bible, because I don't know if you remember how he was introduced, but it was during a lynching that we first met Saul. Stephen, the first martyr, was being stoned to death. He was being hit by rocks so many times by so many people that he died. And Saul was in charge of it all. The person standing by as the breath went out of Stephen. And now he is traveling to Damascus, a city that has been in the news a lot as it is located in modern-day Syria. It actually seems strange that he's traveling there. This tells us that Christianity is spreading. It's leaving the borders of Israel. In the past year, I read an article about how to fight wildfires. We've had a lot of wildfires in our world, things that have spread without any control. The main tool used to fight a wildfire is the chainsaw. Wildfire fighters, go out and they try to cut off the fuel of the fire. You don't try to put the fire out, you cut off its fuel and let it burn until it is no more. Christianity was spreading, so Saul was going to cut off the fuel. He was going to kill the evangelists, one of whom being Ananias. He was breathing threats and destruction. He wasn't just saying them, he was breathing them. Threats and destruction were Saul's life source. As you can probably tell from this sermon, that things are not very different. Threats and destruction are breathed in our culture all the time. Trust is now an anomaly. We don't trust anybody or anything, even one another. How can we do anything of significance if we do not trust and are not trusted? Our default interaction has become suspicion, which is a deep breath of threat and destruction. We are not so different from Saul, breathing threats and destruction. So, like Saul, we need new eyes. We need to see things differently. Many people use this story as the prototypical model of Christian conversion. I was going down a dark path and then Jesus showed up and now I'm here. Sanctifying grace is what John Wesley calls it. It is about redemption, and we have a need to be redeemed. Because Saul breathed threats and destruction, so do we. So do our leaders who breathe threats and destruction as we talk about building walls and separating and searching and deploying and destroying and converting and dominating and showing supremacy. I got my first job the summer of my sophomore year of high school. I did not work in a restaurant or cut lawns. I had done that as sort of odd jobs in the past, but my first job I got that summer. And I'm not kidding when I tell you this. I was a bailiff in the state court of Clark County. I got the job because the judge went to my church. And he knew that I was thinking about becoming a lawyer, and so he brought me in. I was deputized by the sheriff's office and everything. And it was a very eye-opening experience for me. I don't know if any of you have ever sat in a courtroom for any amount of time, but it's a significant experience. It's like actually seeing the faces of those who are committing the crimes or being accused of the crimes. On Tuesdays, it was jail call. First thing in the morning, the guards would chain a group of men together, put them on a bus, and bring them to the courthouse. They would walk in a line because that's all they could do, and they would come in to be arraigned. They had committed a crime in the previous week, and now they were going to get a hearing. all day long, one by one. They would come up. The judge would read the charges against them, what they did, and he would ask them, how do you plead? 90% of them would say guilty. The expense and time of a trial is too much. And so many people just thought, there's no way I'm going to win. So they would stand one by one and they would hear what they did. Domestic assault, drugs, DUI, guilty, guilty, guilty. And you would hear if it was their first offense, second offense, or third. I watched men, mostly black men, file through all day, every Tuesday, and saw a different part of humanity. I left that courtroom with new eyes. I saw things differently. When you face the realities, your eyes change. Saul on this road had to face the reality of Jesus, and his eyes changed. I think we all really do have this burning desire to see change, but we are afraid to enter the fray. We are afraid to look at a new possibility because it will strike us blind and we will need new eyes. I don't know who said this quote, but it's one of my favorites. If we act like we say we believe, we would live our lives much differently. Our world would be different. It would change. Think of the people who believed what they said they did. They are world changers. Some say and believe bad things, breathing threats and destruction, and so Holocausts happen. Some say and believe good things, and civil rights laws are passed. Slavery is abolished. Healing comes to nations. But very often we don't look at it. We do not enter into people's lives because then we would need new eyes. Our vision would change. Saul could have just stopped killing Christians. Redemption through apathy. Instead, Jesus gave him new eyes and even a new name, and he changed the world as Paul. I didn't know a thing about food justice until I met the children who are hungry. I didn't know a thing about economic inequality until I talked to people who are poor. I didn't know a thing about war until I walked with a soldier through it. And I didn't know a thing about our system of mass incarceration until I began to meet and minister with prisoners. Where are we looking to receive new eyes and new vision? Is it in numbers? Or the money in the budget? Where you are looking is going to determine your vision. And to go further, where is God calling us to look? Where is the reality of people who need to know Christ? How do we need our vision changed? In other words, what are we blind to? One afternoon, I received a call from the Statesboro Police Department. I was the chaplain at Reinhardt University at the time. I missed the call, and we have caller ID, and that is what it said. It just said Statesboro Police Department. My mind began to race because no message was left. I began to wonder if one of our students is in jail and they called me. Why would they call me, of all people? What could they have done? What am I going to do? So I called back and went straight to voicemail when it immediately answered. And it said, "You have reached the police chief of the Statesboro Police Department." So I immediately hung up. I gathered myself. I called back expecting to leave a message this time, but this time he answered, which threw me, but I couldn't hang up now. So I introduced myself and asked what I could do for him, and he began talking to me about studying religion. And all of a sudden, things clicked into place. He was one of my students. I teach an intro to religion in an online course for Reinhardt, specifically for those who are getting their bachelor's of criminal justice. And the police chief of the Statesboro Police Department was in my class. So we began chatting about different aspects of studying religion. And then he said, "I really want to talk to you about the letter." When I first started teaching this course, there was only one part of the syllabus that I had to come up with. Everything else was pretty much set. The textbook that we used, the pace, all of that. Everything else had already been designed. So in trying to think of how I could wrap up a class on Intro to Religions for students seeking a degree in criminal justice, I decided that they should read Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail and talk about the themes of justice present in the letter and in all religions. Now, I made this decision before news stories started piling in about Ferguson and Baltimore, New York, and Chicago. This is before Colin Kaepernick started kneeling. I Can't Breathe and Black Lives Matter weren't words in our collective conscience yet, but now they are. He continued, I read the letter. Said, I've never read it before. It affected me so much that I've read it 3 or 4 times. I've asked other officers to read it and let me know what they think. We've had discussions about it. Our black officers have opened up and started sharing their stories. We've read it with prisoners. And here's what I've done. I've called the local president of the local chapter of the NAACP, and we're going to have a series of individual and community meetings to figure out how can we be better. I just wanted you to know that, he said. When you look at the horizon of Damascus, you're going to receive new eyes. Our problem, I think, is not that we do not know what to do, it's that we don't know where to look, and we are afraid to start walking. We're afraid to receive God's vision. Love your enemies. God shows no partiality. God has made us brothers and sisters. And as one of my favorite books says, everyone is more than the worst thing they've ever done. I have told you the way, Jesus says. Walk in it. One year for spring break, I took 9 college students and 2 faculty to Nashville. We entered into the lives of women recovering from addiction and abuse at Thistle Farms, an incredible ministry there. We went and worked at a house for children that are in the foster care system. We went and talked to lawyers who work with undocumented workers. And one of the days, we actually got to meet with 2 men who were freedom riders. And we got to go and sit and talk with them. They were college students when that happened at East Tennessee State University. And one of them, Freddie, told this story, which I think really hits the heart of this scripture. Freddie was one of the first freedom riders. He and 17 other people boarded a bus in Nashville and rode it to Birmingham, Alabama. He was 19 when it happened. 10 minutes outside of the city, their police escort left, abandoning them in a deal made with the local KKK. When the bus pulled into the station, a mob was waiting for them. Freddie and his compatriots were attacked and beaten. Freddie still has a scar on his leg because he jumped off of a bridge and landed on a car, and he couldn't run anymore. So they caught him and took him to jail. So there they all were in jail, beaten and broken, worried what would happen to them. One of their leaders, a minister, was with them. And Freddie and the others noticed that he was just standing there staring at the jail cell door. He was standing in the middle of the room just staring, not moving for about 20 minutes, until someone finally asked, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm going to make these doors open." And he gathered everybody. He said, come on, we're going to make these doors open. So they all gathered around and they stared at the doors. And they kept staring and looking. And nothing happened. They did this for a while. Individuals began to kind of retreat back into the corners. But as they dissipated, the minister started saying to them, "Y'all are giving up. Don't give up. We're going to make these doors open. Don't give up." And Freddie ended that story by saying, "We thought he was crazy." But again, he always was kind of a different kind of dude. He was. He saw things differently than most. He had new eyes. Those doors did open, but not right then. And still not enough. But now people can ride a bus. They can sit wherever they want. he could see that. And I can tell you, I can see immigrants being reunited with their families. I can see jail cells sitting empty. I can see families that are healed and made whole. I can see communities healed and made whole. I can see everyone with the same opportunities and same advantages. I can see the hungry fed. And I'm going to gather all of us together. Say, church, we're going to make these doors open. I believe Christ will show up and give us new eyes to see.